Parvathy.
Well, you have to say what you've done, how long you've been at Palantir.
I've been at Palantir 10.5 years, and I worked on product and in the field and everywhere, and I haven't seen Dr. Karp in a long time, so I get to ask you questions now.
Yeah.
All right, okay. What has surprised you the most about being a public company CEO?
Our narrative, which was and is and will continue to be narrowly tailored to our view of what the foundational software of the future will look like, was one that, often analysts had trouble digesting, because if you're talking about, civil liberties and building civil liberties architecture into your software in 2004, you're talking about building a software platform on large data sets where the end product is not a choice between finding terrorists and civil liberties, but resolving the problem so that you do both. That, and then moving to various other products we produced, but like most notably Foundry platform, where we're talking about revitalizing and, if necessary, replacing or building our product into the infrastructure of a modern enterprise as if it was actually modern today, with data protections. These things have been so far ahead of, now we're talking about AI that actually is operational, at least in the kind of more clandestine context we're allowed to talk about it, or moving some of those insights to the edge with dealing with the needed ability to interpret, but also figure out the subset of data that's necessary while dealing with compute and other issues at the edge. That those things are so far ahead of the common sense of what's been done in the past that I worried we would struggle to find people that would actually engage with that. And Palantir has approximately 1.5 million investors. These are people who have taken the time to actually understand what we're doing, but also have taken the courageous act of saying, okay, well, what if some of the things that we've learned about how the world will work are actually no longer true? And what will the world, in a world where, in fact, what we tend to, in shorthand, call it alpha, is directly tethered to or being generated by what we call software. That's a very strong leap of faith, especially in the enterprise context, because, as most people know, many software products offer limited to no value today, let alone aspire to be transformational in the future. And so that's been a very big surprise, that welcome surprise. And then I think the other thing that has been pretty favorable, that surprised me, is, of course, we were very worried going into the DPO that, our culture would have to, of course, things have to change somewhat. Yeah. But I mean, has our culture really changed more than it changed when we went from PG to Gaia to first commercial product, which was unsuccessful, to Foundry, to some of the AI stuff we're doing, to now AI on the edge? These also require cultural changes. And I think the cultural change of what it means to be at Palantir, which is you get to, work on the transformational software of tomorrow with some of the more interesting people in the world in your company, and some of the most interesting clients outside of your company, that hasn't really shifted. In fact, I would say in general, it's become in some ways easier. Of course, there are a lot of institutional overlays, and there's a constant pressure to say even less, and so pushing back on that is hard. There are some things, of course, that are necessary, and then there's some bureaucracy that is necessary, but then trying to calibrate what we can push back against. I would say, though, the most important thing for me is I personally, people like you who are long-term veterans at Palantir, very long-term veterans in your case, who've been through the bad and the very bad, and occasionally some really cool things. We're sitting on a pile of things that, you called equity that were not only declining in value, but were illiquid and stayed. And I had a lot of pressure to make sure that, people who had, invested their labor, that you bore the fruits of that investment at some point in the future, especially since it's not the case that everyone stayed at Palantir because of me, but some people did. And so it's like, of course there's bureaucracy and other things, and trying to do my best to not blow up the company with every statement I make, but the relief of not having this pressure on my back is enormous and very, very freeing.
Yeah.
And so I'm happy about that. And I'm very happy for, the people like you who, you remember all of our discussions and when Foundry started, it's like, and whenever, the thing is, when you're working on products that are not understood, like most people have like a report of what other people have done, and then now they're going to try and make it a little better and hire 5,000 people to sell it, right? Palantir doesn't do that. We've never done that. And what we do is we have lots of clients that are working on really cool products, and we begin to kind of iterate on what are the underlying problems of which they're not mostly aware, that would pre-solve not only the problems that they have, but the negative externalities of solving that problem. So very similar to the negative externality for most people of stopping terrorism was forgetting about civil liberties. The negative externality of protecting civil liberties was you had terror attacks. How do you solve both? But not that different. Like, how do you actually get an algorithm to be so functional that it is approaching or becomes what people call AI in a context where data is unlimited? How do you push that to the edge? How do you get Foundry to install in hours in a context like COVID, so that you can actually distribute the vaccine where the databases like in the UK are massively siloed? And the problem is a question of, the answer to the problem will save thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. But we were working on these problems before there was COVID. It's like there's a narrative like, well, suddenly COVID came and then Palantir flourished. But like, we built a product assuming disjunction. Yeah. And we've been building this product, and then there's, what does it mean to build a product? There's been many iterations. Of course, the original insight was, how do you manage transforms at scale while protecting data? Okay, but that's a very broad, statement to problems. And then there's a specific, solving the specific needs of each client while building a motor that is universally applicable requires a kind of depth and elasticity of the software and the code that very, very few institutions could even really approximate an understanding of, yet alone build. Then, managing that at scale so that we don't have to change our culture, which, Apollo looks to, Wall Street analysts who take the time to actually look at our products, which is not enough, honestly, but as like a unit economic nirvana, and that it is. But the reason why Apollo is important to us is not purely the unit economic nirvana of allowing us to manage, presumably limitless clients with the same number of resources. It's that it's a cultural nirvana that allows us not to hire, and we still roughly have the same number of people we did a year ago. Yeah. And, it's like, and then, but our company is expanding rapidly, and that allows us to have a very narrow, tight, and specific kind of culture while having a broad ability to service the world with our software.
Yeah. One of the fun parts I feel like for me is I see the external, like the individual investors, like explain Foundry to each other or explain what we're doing to each other, and it's kind of cool to see everyone grapple with it.
What's your favorite riff there? I have lots of just that they understand. They take the time to understand the tech.
Like during like demo day and the deep dive and stuff, there'd be like engineers who were like, if they can actually do this is insane. Like I see people, like we've never ever been able to show the product externally. It's like, if you're not at a client, you don't really get to show and tell. It's like,
yeah, I find it super heartening to, when we interact with people, investors and others who are technical enough to understand the problems we've solved. Yeah. and then have taken the time to go deep enough into the product demos to understand that, we've actually solved a lot of these problems. And it's enormously gratifying to have an external cacophony of, interest where the interest is pretty technical. It's like, it's surprising how much time and energy and thought the average person puts into understanding our software. That's the positive. The negative version is how little time and effort some professional analysts take in understanding what software is, since it's their profession. So it's like, they often conflate, buying wrenches where you may not really need to understand the delta between one wrench and another. You just can look at the lagging indicator with sales. Now, obviously our sales are kind of going very well, but what's powering it is our products that are just differentiated is way too modest. They're completely unique, and both in terms of how they're built and how we service them and how we interact with clients and how we're building currently. Also, look at the speed of our product development over the last 2 years. It's actually, sped up. It completely, just while doing a DPO, while creating a sales force. It's like we're accelerating on all fronts.
Yeah. Who are we, is related to the people who are actually deep diving into what's available. Like, who are we looking to recruit now? Has it changed? Or?
No, I think, much to the chagrin of Silicon Valley, who was investing in, consumer internet apps and various products that are largely at best described as carcinogens in our society, and as worse decided as like hyper carcinogens that transfer all the alpha away from individuals to a narrow set of people. We've been able to retain and recruit the very, very best people since inception. And this is like, as you know, been a constant frustration for Silicon Valley, that we disproportionately got the best people to not only come to Palantir, but stay. And we are still very focused on recruiting the very best, most inquisitive, hardest working, insightful, primarily technical talent in the world from any place we can find it. And I would say on that note, like our recruiting is like our ability, our retention, our ability to recruit, and because the net has gotten wider, more people know who we are, but also because as technical people engage with our product, because they may just be looking at it as like an investment option, and they're like, wow, okay, this is real. And so like what we're seeing internally is we're getting, our hit rate and getting people is going up. The quality is not, typically when people IPO, the quality of people you're able to recruit and retain goes down. I don't think that's been the case for us, because before we were very much niche. So if you were at a super elite school, who you might know people work at Palantir, and therefore you would know the quality of the engineers and the products. But if you weren't, you might not know it. Now, if you're just sitting out there anywhere in the world and like, you're like, you've probably heard of us, and you're like, hey, engineers are very, very skeptical, as you know. You're an engineer. So if somebody's claiming, oh, this product has great software, what's the first thing you're going to do? Go think, oh, this isn't great. I'm going to go check it out. And it's like, it's usually, by the way, not so great. It's usually like 5,000 salespeople and a completely rusty product that was randomly written somewhere and has limited utility and negative utility in most contexts outside of what it was created. So you come to Palantir and, it's like, you just go looking at Palantir, like, okay, well, let me look at what I think they're doing with the code base. And you're like, wow, that's cool. That's cool. Wow, that's super cool. This looks like a problem they're actually working on that they're not yet talking about. I'd like to be involved. And then, of course, once you've gotten past that hurdle, then you look at the quality of the people. And, technical people have very precise ideas of what that would mean, i.e. people as good as I am or better. And so then you look at internally at Palantir, and what you're expecting to find as a technical person is 50 marketing people that claim they know software because they stayed at Motel 6 or they worked at a bank covering software in the 80s, but have no earthly clue what we're doing now. What you find is like leadership that from beginning to the end actually is working on driving these things. And that just leads to a recruiting charisma. And we're really seeing very strong interest in joining Palantir. Last not least, we've run the company primarily for the interest of, it's like for the people of Palantir. And I would say, you know, part of what has always made me and still makes me an economic progressive is, you know, we ran the company where everybody has a part in the company. From an equity perspective and a participation in the company, we also give people at Palantir enormous responsibility, which is appealing. Yeah. If you're, you just say you've just left school and you believe and maybe are the world's best software engineer of one archetype or another. Do you really want to work 30 years under somebody before you actually get to write code to the trunk? Or do you want to be writing code that's actually used from people that might actually know some things about writing code that you didn't learn in school that are at your level or, you know, conceivably better? And so that just like that leads to this very positive dialectic. And I believe internally it's like, look at the quality of the people we have, and then you can imagine these people running Palantir. Like when now their office are reopening and I'm making an effort to meet people, I see people who will be, running parts of Palantir in the next couple of years, not people that are just going to be working for the Palantir version of the man.
Yeah.
So, and that's really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.